They had a reputation, for drugging girls at these events, and the girls would wake up, they didn't know where they were, and a couple girls told us they were actually targeted, but they were warned, they will drug you.
It's like the final F you. You don't turn me down, I turn you down.
By one account, her head was smashed down on the bumper of the vehicle, and then she was hit with a lug wrench, causing the blunt force trauma. That was the cause of her death.
But it was a very brutal murder. Multiple weapons, multiple blunt force trauma, sharp edge wounds.
Such a complicated case.
And that's why a lot of people don't like to touch it.
I just think my grandparents deserve this closure.
There are a lot of ups and downs.
Would you be willing to give something new to the public to try to help this case move along?
Hey guys, welcome to Close Range Crime. My name is Ray, and today we are going to discuss a 50-year-old case, 50-year-old unsolved homicide. Back in 2000, the district attorney at the time was quoted saying, "There is someone in Bowie, probably more than one person, that knows what happened to Donna Dustin and just aren't talking." I couldn't agree more. I know there are a handful of people who have information and who have just decided they're not talking. This documentary is going to be set up a little differently. You're going to notice that as I tell you about Donna Dustin's story, there is going to be a main theory that continuously pops up. That's because, one, I have 4 people with extensive history in law enforcement all coming to the same conclusion, that there is one group of guys that are responsible for Donna's death. There was a particular group of men in Bowie at the time that just constantly raised hell. And it appears they had means, motive, and no moral compass. 2, at one point, these guys were persons of interest, suspects, and many of them still remain on the suspect list as of today. 3, witness statements are consistent in the fact that these group of men had something to do with Donna's death. Rather, they participated in just the sexual assault, the SA, participated in both the SA and the murder, or they had direct knowledge from the time. The question then becomes who in this group is responsible, what they're responsible for, and who has direct knowledge of the crime. I have talked to so many people when researching this case, and you're going to see that there are discrepancies in timelines, some details. Even the newspapers were inconsistent at times, and that's not surprising considering the fact that this case is 50 years old now. What may be surprising is the fact that this case still has movement today, and there's a group of people who will continue to dig up new information on a case that's 50 years old. As always, I will list contact information below for anyone who has any leads or tips that they would like to share. I urge anyone who does have information, please use these contacts. Most names in this case have been changed due to the fact that this is an ongoing case. Please keep in mind that the theories here are just that, theories. The details of this case are disturbing, so viewer discretion is advised. And with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, let's get into it. This is Donna Dustin's story. Former Prince George's County Police Officer Al Gaither has been digging into Donna's case for years now. He and Bill Smith, a retired PI, have been working on her case relentlessly. They have an extensive list of people they have interviewed, potential suspects, and a list of potential places that could be the crime scenes, along with many reported details of that terrible night. As a long-term resident of Bowie, Al understands the culture of Bowie in the 1970s and the way that this impacted the community. He was even a classmate of Donna's younger brother, Alan. This area has grown tremendously since 1973, but Al took me to key areas to retrace Donna's night.
And so over the last 2.5 years, we've been running down leads. Bill and I have done a lot of interviews with people on the phone and on Facebook and through email. And I met with people in person, and I've gone back and forth with some of these people really that were interesting, I thought, over and over again. Who was there at the very end, where they were at. My background was in patrol, so my interviews were usually for things like armed robberies and carjackings and theft. Not to say that some of these folks hadn't committed murder, but when it came to a murder case, homicide would take that over. We haven't learned a lot from the police. We met, we've had correspondence with emails back and forth, but we only had one actual meeting with homicide. And so we were hoping to be there for a few hours. We were there a little bit over an hour when a hot call came in for a homicide. The cold case is also tasked with homicide, current homicide. So he had to leave to go to a homicide during our meeting about a homicide. Gotcha. And Anne Arundel County never used to be like that, but they've had a real big uptick, like most of the areas around here, with violent crimes, murder, carjackings, things like that. Not really giving us much. We had a lot of questions, but he would not answer. But he, without saying so, he let us know we were on the right track, and we had pretty good information from our informants. Everything we have basically is what I would just summarize as hearsay evidence. It's nothing I would really even be comfortable presenting to a grand jury. And you get a lot of conflicting information, so it's easy to see how the police will let us stray.
There was no homicide unit at that time, correct?
Right. Yeah. Not to belittle that police organization, the Anne Arundel County Police, but it was a robbery unit that was tasked with the homicide investigation. And I think everyone agrees there were some serious mistakes made with respect to evidence collection. They weren't that experienced, and there was some rivalry between the two agencies. They could have helped. They did help to some extent, but, Anne Arundel County really was primary.
This case is tragic, it is sad, and it will probably make you angry for a variety of reasons. There was no homicide unit in Anne Arundel County at the time of Donna's murder. There are dozens of people who either saw Donna that night, could have been involved in the murder or cover-up, had information back then, or have come across information over the past 50 years that could be helpful to this case. Donna was just 17, about to turn 18. She had just graduated high school, and she had her entire life ahead of her. The Dustin household consisted of Donna, of course, Dolores, her mother, her father, Joe, and her younger brother, who was a teenager at the time, Alan. The plan for November 16th was that the family was going to take a trip to Florida, but Donna decided to stay back. So on this day, Dolores wakes up Donna at 5 a.m. and she said that she could remember her hair being a stringy mess as her eyes opened at 5 a.m. She told Donna to be careful. She reminded her of where the emergency contact numbers were. And on her way out of Donna's bedroom, Donna told her to have a good time. And then she rolled over and went back to sleep. So it is important that I give you some information on Bowie in 1973, just so that you understand the culture and better understand the case in turn. This is the time of the Ponderosas, the Peoples, the High's convenience stores. In the 1970s, Bowie was growing at a very fast pace, and although crimes did happen, the majority of them seemed to be petty crime. Bowie in 1973 seemed to be relatively safe from brutal crimes like this, but Donna's case would change the course of history. Once Donna wakes up, she gets ready and she goes out with her best friend, Lori. They went out shopping, and Lori said Donna had said that she had really hoped that her family was going to have a great time on their trip. And I just think that that speaks to her character, that she was a caring person and she was thoughtful, she wasn't selfish. Lori said Donna was a great friend. She was very trustworthy, very loyal and honest.
She was just so much fun. God, I've got so many memories with her. We would all go back and party at the power lines, or any place like that, and have a bonfire and stuff. She wasn't a really big druggie. She liked to smoke or pop it. She was a big drinker. The guys would get their beer, wine, and Donna was a big drinker. She could hold her liquor.
Some describe Donna as beautiful, but a bit feisty and outspoken, which of course could have rubbed some people the wrong way. She was not disciplined in her schoolwork, but she would prove to be responsible in other ways. Once she graduated, she ended up working for the same company that her father worked for, and within 5 months, she had saved up enough money to buy her own car. She was known for making to-do lists. She had her own checking account, so there was an independence and a responsible side to her. She was happy-go-lucky, she was level-headed, and according to Lori, she may have been a little too trusting.
Donna was pretty street smart in a lot of ways, but she was also naive and trusted people too much. You know, she was starting to spend more time with what they all called the rough crowd.
So because Donna was such an outgoing girl, she was very social. She made friends of all types, acquaintances of all types. And unfortunately, some of these people, they were very sketchy in their own ways, stealing cars, using and dealing heavy drugs like heroin, having questionable connections with the police and even gang connections, specifically the Pagans. Now, all of this is alleged, and as I go throughout this, just note that many of these things are what was reported by the people who hung out near these crowds at the time. It would come out decades later that some of these men could have even been involved in some of the other cases around the area of missing persons and even murder. In relation to Donna's case specifically, and some of the most disturbing information that came up was the fact that this group took advantage of women.
Here, we're going to go to where it kind of started. It's after her day was done, and she's dropping off her date, which was Danny O'Connor. The preface to that was the gentleman who drove them around that evening was Chris. So he dropped off Danny and Donna at her house. Now, the timeline's a little bit off. We've had so much conflicting data on there, but we'll say 2,300 hours. They make it back to her house. And what we're going to do now is go from her house to where Danny is. Danny O'Connor is no longer with us. He died some years ago also. Now, Danny O'Connor and Chris were both in the volunteers at the firehouse.
As far as you know, were they cooperative with the investigation?
Oh, yeah. They were ruled out very early on as not having anything to do with it. And Chris had many back and forths with him, many interviews with him. Real good guy, retired firefighter. By all accounts, Danny and Donna were at her house for about an hour or so. And they were drinking, romancing, and if you read the newspaper reports, she had offered him some pot, and he took a hit off there was a rolled marijuana cigarette, and he didn't like the taste of it. He said, "There's something about this," and she said, "Yeah, well, basically it's laced with PCP," and he didn't like the taste of it, and he said, "I don't do that stuff," and so that was it. At this point in her life, she was kind of casually, recreationally using alcohol and marijuana. The PCP thing, I don't know much about her use of that, but she did have in her possession some PCP.
I mean, these are nice houses.
They're, according to neighbors, they didn't really see much. They weren't really paying attention. These are longtime residents. No one saw anything that night, unfortunately. So leaving her house, she would have come down Bel Air Drive. She would have made a left on 197, then made this right on the Mitchellville Road. It's just zip, zip, zip. It's cutting through town. And this is just an old farming road here. It was really nothing here back then in 1973. That's it.
So we know by their own accounts, as well as the accounts of Donna's best friend Lori, that Donna was with Danny and Chris that night, both of which who have been ruled out as suspects, and they were ruled out early on. It's believed that Donna ended her date sometime between 11 p.m. 12 a.m. and she drove Danny home. A key piece of information is that laced marijuana cigarette. It's laced with PCP, and PCP is a hell of a drug. It has various side effects. The list seems ongoing. Some of them include a feeling of euphoria, a sense of this superhuman strength, irritability, sexual prowess, paranoia, combativeness, rage, severe mood swings, violence, and psychosis. And the list, like I said, just continues. This piece of information is going to be important later. So Donna has her date. She's not ready to call it a night yet. We know that she went back out, but the exact places where she went, the exact route that she took, it's just not clear. Because so many people were out partying that Friday night, there are a variety of witnesses, but as we know, witness testimony can be sketchy. There was conflicting information given, and you have to think about it. You're talking to not only mainly teenagers, but you're talking to teenagers who were drunk and or high that night. And yes, you will get some very good information, but you will also get information that is contradictory, that is not fitting the timeline, etc., etc. I'm going to briefly show you the places that Al Gaither and Dave Gordell took me to as we go over the details of the case. These places are all within about 10 minutes of each other. Party hopping was a thing that was very common. These particular places are going to include a house on Heather Hills, Jericho Park, Lemonsburg Road, a house on Harwood Lane, the racetrack, and the place where her body would ultimately end up, which was in a gravel pit that was owned by a local resident.
And so we're going to go to the location she hit, which was her house. So she would have turned around and left and gone back down the express route again. So she would have come down here. And again, people knew there was all this partying going here every weekend.
And this was what, less
See
than
the
a
sign?
5-minute drive.
Yes, according to witnesses and the media, there may have been over 100 people here. Passed out in the front yard, the backyard. This is it right here, this house.
This blue one.
Yep, this is where it was at the time where lived. Now try to imagine all the cars parked on this street, 100 people at this small house, front yard, backyard, the noise, and maybe how often the police may have been called to this location.
Right.
Now we believe she was parked somewhere out here in the front in her car. She had just got a new car. She only made like maybe one payment on it. And she was parked out here outside of her car talking with some of these boys that were here. And we believe at that point they followed her back to her house.
So there's kind of been this debate about this party house because it's stated that over 100 people were there that night, but I kind of think it's plausible just for the simple fact that there may not have been 100 people at one time. If a party's going on 4, 5, 6 hours, people coming and going, and again, people party hopped a lot, I think it's plausible that maybe 100 people did hit that house that night. And this house, we're going to say that this house was occupied by Jerry. Jerry was one of those people in that very rough crowd, often in fistfights, stealing cars. They basically partied every weekend. There was a handful of guys that were known to drug women. Quayle was noted as being the drug of choice. They would slip this into girls' drinks and then gang them, SA them. And they called this pulling a train. It's sick, it's disgusting. One of the leading theories about that night is that Donna ended up at this house, possibly her very last stop of the night, and she invited a couple of these guys back to her house to party. The police would end up finding Donna's car in her driveway on the morning of the 17th, and it was apparent that there were a group of people that were there partying based off of various beers that were there and cigarettes that were found.
No signs of damage to anything in the house, no struggle, no blood, no broken glass, furniture, nothing. So, there were cigarette butts, there were beer cans, beer tops, and I believe the only thing that was recovered were a couple of beer tops. There were pictures of some things, but the evidence wasn't maintained. But there is, still evidence. But the girls had cleaned up that morning, not knowing that they were facing a girl that had been raped, murdered.
So we'll get into the evidence here in a little bit, but I just want to stress again, because I can't stress it enough, how much information has changed over the years. But I will say the one thing that has been very consistent is the fact that this group of guys was somehow involved with Donna's death. Rather, they may have just been participants of the SA, or they did both the SA and the murder. They were witnesses. They heard firsthand knowledge of what happened. This group of men just keeps coming up over and over again.
He had a reputation as a really violent guy with contempt for women. I also get the impression that he was a real bully, too.
They had a reputation, for drugging girls, what they called pulling a train. Girls would wake up, they didn't know where they were. And one girl, actually a couple girls, told us they were actually targeted, but they were warned. You go out with, and this evening, they will drug you.
To how awful they were, that they were despicable people.
Before we get into the real hardcore details of this crime, let's just take a look at a couple other places that Donna could have been that night.
This used to be the Heather Hills party grounds. This was all on the right where the shopping center is. We call it the Heather Hills Dunes. And some have suggested she was over there that night as well.
And how much has this area built up since then?
Dramatically. This was all farms in here. And now it's all mostly townhouses and retail. Based on, again, hearsay information, there was 2 sites that came up. One was right here we're at right now, the Heather Hills area. 2 was a place called Lemons Bridge Road, which was very popular back then. Both are in proximity to where the suspects lived and where she finally ended up. We have our own belief that it was Lemons Bridge Road, close proximity to some of the other points of interest. This is Lemons Bridge. And these gates were all that's left open. Been here many times, never saw a police car ever come back here. These things went on all night long, these parties. Very quiet, no lights, very, very dark. According to another witness that we interviewed, one of their friends, he thinks she may have stopped at another party over here across from Acorn Hill Park. It's very possible that she was, and she may have walked over to the park, according to him. Maybe she did. There were several parties going on.
All this is just so compact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's claiming you're party hopping, and we used to all do that. So back in the day, the kids would hang out on this big mound up here called Acorn Hill Park. And according to some, she may have stopped there.
So what's changed here?
None of this was here. The city of Bowie turned this into a more formal park with a walkway.
So this, other than, these buildings back here, this would have been really dark.
This was just grass, and up here is where they used to party. Whether she was here or not at all that night, it's certainly possible.
Yeah. Now, there are 2 witnesses that actually say they saw Donna at the pizza wheel that night. One witness said it was around closing time, so that would have been around 11 p.m. Now, in her autopsy, it was found that there was food in her stomach, so that does support that idea. No more information was given as to what type of food was in her stomach, nothing like that. But one of the witnesses said that Donna did appear drunk at that time, and she was alone. So Donna would end up being found on Myers Station Road. One end of the road is in PG County, the other end is in AA County. Both Al and Dave took me to both ends where this road is now blocked off from the public. This is a photo from the time showing the area where her body was found, about 3 miles from her house. This is the property of now deceased resident Buzz Myers. One newspaper said this area was known as Buzzy's. However, I only saw that and heard that in that article. She was found by 2 hunters at about 10 a.m. on the 17th of November. Mr. Myers saw the scene and was quoted saying, "It was a horror story. Sick, sick, just absolutely sick." Retired Chief Investigator David Cordell worked on Donna's case from 1998 until 2013 when he retired. Donna Dustin was found brutally beaten, nude, and lifeless in a gravel pit on Myers Station Road. This area was owned by Buzz Myers and now stays in the Myers family. Unfortunately, they would not allow us to go onto the property today, but Cordell takes me to the entrance of Myers Station Road and explains in detail what the area looked like back in 1973.
This is what we used to call the circle. But back then it was just a private residence. This is where we used to sit and hang out.
So if you went back there now, can you just describe me a little bit what it
Yeah,
looked
you
like?
go down a couple hundred yards down this road, and then you'll come to a clearing. And if you turn right at the clearing, there's a new building that he put and then up. Off to the right of that was the hill where you saw the uniformed police car parked on the day she was discovered. And back up there, if you get on that right of way, it's just a flat, straight line. She was found about, I don't know, 100 yards down the road in the woods by about, 100, 150 feet. We were able to triangulate it from photographs from 73. We were able to determine pretty much the exact spot where she was found. There's been a very heavy storm that came through. I don't know, since I've been active in the investigation, it totally wiped out. It was like a mini burst or small tornado. So it's like totally, the woods are reorganized.
What are your thoughts on her being dumped back here?
I'm pretty certain that whoever the person or persons was knew this area, and there was no way to determine whether she was brought back here by the Prince George's County side or by this side, the Anne Arundel County side. Either way, the access was there then. You could drive right through from one to the other. So it was somebody that, it's not an area that, unless you were familiar with this or lived with this or even hunted back here, you wouldn't know this area or how to get to it.
They would have traveled down here, and this is our most solid belief. They would have gone down here to a very popular party site. There's a Myers Station Road right here on the right, but they blocked it off. And I think it was the late 70s. They closed the road down completely because it was so dangerous to go across the bridge. So right here on the right, that's Myers Station Road. You go down about 2 blocks, make a left. You go on a dirt road. You go across a rickety wooden bridge. They went over across there, and they dropped her on the left at the old gravel pits there. It was the old trolley bed for the Baltimore, Washington, Annapolis trolley system that ran from Annapolis all the way to Baltimore and D.C., the old tracks. And that particular property was known as Myers Station, and the owner of that property was Buzz Myers, who's deceased. And by his accounts, that was a real popular party place for many, many years, just crazy parties and people running around naked and screaming, and and a lot of stolen cars that were dropped off there by some of our actors in this.
How do you think they chose that area?
Because it was another party spot, and people knew it was dark. And because it was on the Anne Arundel County side, they never patrolled there, because back in those days, there would be one police officer assigned to like all that Western District area.
Okay.
And so they never went back there. And it's like, I'm not going to get myself in trouble being one car driving back there with all that craziness. So they would never go back there. And because it was not PG jurisdiction, PG County never went over there. So it was a no man's land where you didn't have to worry about the police showing up.
Gotcha.
They'd show up later to recover stolen vehicles and stuff, but they didn't go down there routinely. So it was even up here on Lemons Bridge, the cops, I never saw cops show up there. As long as you kept quiet, nobody complained because there wasn't any houses there.
Sadly, where Donna was found ended up being the starting point of not only the aftermath of a very brutal crime, but we'll call an unfortunate investigation. She was laying right over the Anne Arundel County, Maryland line, just beside Prince George's County. Now, the PG County actually had a homicide unit where the Anne Arundel County side did not. So, of course, the question comes up, was this strategic planning? And there's an argument to both sides as to if this was a strategic planning or not. So if you're looking at the theory that this group of guys were responsible for either essaying or murdering or both, we have to consider the fact that these guys were likely drunk and high. Would they have had the right mindset to dump her body on the AA line knowing that there wasn't a homicide unit? My kind of argument against this is the fact that if you look at this map, there is a river running through this area. If this was strategic placement of her body, why would she not been thrown in the water? I know DNA was not a thing at the time. It wasn't something that was commonly known, I think, around, amongst the public, that DNA was currently being collected by investigators for later testing. But I think the river would have possibly concealed her body for a longer amount of time. So maybe they weren't thinking about DNA, but could the river not have maybe carried her body further down? Maybe it would have concealed her body for longer. At first, I really just believed that these guys got extremely lucky by placing her on the AA County line. But there's another thing to consider, and that is the fact that it has come out that some of these guys may have had ties to police officers, and they had very sketchy connections with them. If that is the case, maybe they did know that AA County was not as equipped to handle a homicide as PG County would have been. It is most certainly a possibility. So ultimately, this case ends up being investigated by AA County, a robbery division of AA County. Now, I think some of them probably did do their very best with the resources and knowledge that they had, but it was just limited. I think other investigators may have kind of pushed the envelope and approached it in a way that made others shut down. I want you to listen to Lori's experience with the officers shortly after Donna's death.
Back then, you never trusted cops. It's the time when, the Beatles were calling police the pigs, and Vietnam. That was, you didn't trust anyone in a uniform. And they weren't kind. None of them were kind. They were screaming and yelling, trying to get other things out of me. PG County was the worst. Cops that beat up people, 6 detectives yelling at an 18-year-old, and they kept telling me I had to go to jail and stuff, And, I'll never forgive them really for never trusting me, because they had no reason not to. If they would have been truthful, with some things, I could have helped them so much.
Now, that hostility could have very well been related to the fact that this was an intense situation. This girl had been brutally violated and murdered, and this did not happen in this area. It was just not a thing. And I say that because as I was researching, I found information on the opposite side of the spectrum. I found comments saying that the police almost acted as friends to some of these teenagers and young adults. This person from Bowie explains, back in 1968, my friend and I were drinking a beer in a 68 Buick Skylark in the Bowie High School parking lot one night, and a PG County stopped to check us out. The floor of the car had about a dozen empty cans, and the car smelled like a brewery when my friend rolled down his window. The cop looked around the interior of the car with his flashlight and then said, "I just wanted to see if you were up to no good. Be careful." And he walked away. A different time for sure. Another person shares his experience saying, drinking in the parking lot in the middle of the night after a shift at Bob's Big Boy, the cops would sometimes come drink with us. And a person responded, and yes, when I was younger, they'd take it for themselves when we were caught, meaning the alcohol. I wanted to point this out, one, to show the culture at the time, and two, because this idea does support the theory that, yes, maybe some of these suspects did have inappropriate relations with the police. These relationships might have greatly overstepped boundaries and even been illegal. Back at the crime scene, police find Donna nude and battered. It was apparent that she had wounds consistent with knife wounds in her upper torso. However, the medical examiner would say that it was actually blunt force trauma that ultimately ended up killing her. The police themselves described this murder as very brutal, and due to wounds that were found on one of her hands, they do believe at one point she fought back. Donna would be identified by the only thing that she was wearing, her class ring. There was semen of 3 men that was taken, one of which was Danny O'Connor, which was her date that night. Although rape was technically inconclusive, no one stepped up to say that they had sexual relations with Donna that night. And when you have an incident like this in a town like this, a town that is closer knit, smaller. The buzz about this crime had to be intense. I think it speaks volumes that no one came forward to police and said that they had sexual relations with Donna that night. Now, in addition to the semen, it was reported in one newspaper that there was DNA collected from around her body. The investigators did not clarify exactly what that meant.
Well, the best we can figure is that she was not necessarily murdered back where she was found. And there's different scenarios that have it happening at different places.
Do you think that there were multiple assaults at multiple places?
It's possible. I don't have any direct knowledge, but it seemed as if, based on some forensic examination of the body, you could tell that she had lain in a particular position for a while. You could tell that she was placed back where her body was found. She was carried back there by, we know, two people at least were there. One carried her from the head side and the other carried from her feet. We did recover 2 boot prints at the foot of her body.
In the beginning of this case, a very gruesome detail about what happened to Donna came out, and that was the fact that there was a lug wrench that was found inside of her. Now, if you don't know already, I spoke with Ken Maines, who is a retired cold case detective in Pennsylvania that has a YouTube channel, Unsolved No More. And I passed my research along to him, and he made his own assessment through a video about Donna's case. I just want you to listen closely to what he has to say about this particular detail.
And that lug wrench being forcibly inserted into her vagina is like the final F you. You don't turn me down, I turn you down.
Now, there was a theory that came out of comments that had been made by others when interviewed, in which there was a plan to teach Donna a lesson. There was one guy in particular, we'll call him Carl, that allegedly had a thing for Donna. And he apparently was much older. I want to say in his 30s, which that alone is alarming. To have, this crush on a 17-year-old when you're 30-some years old. Donna had told friends that Carl had really creeped her out and apparently had made some advances towards her that were very much unwanted. And basically, Carl might have hatched this plan to kind of teach her a lesson for turning him down. The plan was hatched basically to humiliate her in the worst way possible by pulling a train on her. This guy would ultimately get what he wanted, forcefully and against Donna's will. Then, possibly because they're already kind of, they have a fucked up mentality anyway, because of the drugs and alcohol, maybe mixture of different types of drugs, that this got out of hand, and a few of them did get violent with her and basically beat her to death. Interestingly enough, when I gave my information to Ken to make his assessment, this is not something that I shared with him. So I thought it was interesting for him to come to this kind of a conclusion in his video. Now, quick note, his video will be linked below if you'd like to check that out. So it's pretty much widely agreed upon that Donna was not killed where she was found, that Meyer Station Road was simply a dumping ground for her. However, we can't completely rule out the idea that she was killed there. And the reason why I say that is there was not very much blood evidence, right? But here's the thing. If the stabbings all happened post-mortem, if the mutilation happened post-mortem, her heart wouldn't have been beating, so there wouldn't have been much blood. So is it possible that she was killed there? Yes, but according to the investigators on the scene, it just did not seem likely that this was the actual place where Donna was killed. The lug wrench was one of the weapons that was believed to have been used to beat her head in, and there was also talk of another weapon, another blunt force trauma type of weapon, along with a knife that would have been used in the assault. Now, being that there are 3 weapons, I think it's only a fair assumption to say that there was likely more than one person who killed her, or who at least struck her. Now, there was forensics done, and I would assume that with that lug wrench, they would have checked to see if there were any fingerprints on that lug wrench. And just an amateur guess here, if there was, I would assume there would have been arrests. So likely there was no fingerprints found on the lug wrench. Again, she was found nude. Her clothing was not found anywhere around her. To this day, no one has been able to locate her clothes. Investigators believe that either those clothes were tossed or they may have been burnt. Apparently, there was one location that could have been a crime scene in which there was a burn pit, so there was question as to whether or not her clothing was burnt. However, again, this was not searched by police. I don't even know if they knew of it at the time. That night, Donna was wearing a red and brown blouse, new jeans, a pair of gray pantyhose. She had a leather handbag with a long strap that said "Made in Mexico," some sort of stamp on it. She also had gold platform shoes and a brown 3/4 length coat. Now, there were 2 sets of footprints found around Donna's body, and there was some question raised later as to whether or not these were actually related to the crime. Reason being, it was about 28 degrees that night, so below freezing. So the idea was that the ground would have been solid and boot prints wouldn't have been left. However, the area that Donna was actually found was more of a sandy type of area, so it would not have froze. So it is highly, highly likely that these boot prints are related to the suspects. The toxicology report would indicate that Donna had a blood alcohol level of 0.19, which was twice over the legal limit. She tested positive for PCP and she tested positive for marijuana. However, I cannot get one direct answer, yes or no, as to whether or not she tested positive for Quaaludes. I'm not even sure if the basic toxicology report that they would have did in 1973 would test for this. If anybody has any direct knowledge of that, please comment below. It's a question I just ran across. Investigators said that Donna died only a few hours before she was found. Now, in Florida, Donna's parents would have received a knock at the door and would have been stunned to see a police officer there. The officer handed her a note that indicated that her daughter was dead. They would have a 13-hour-long car ride by themselves on the way home with no answers as to what happened to Donna. Now, back at Donna's house, 2 friends, one being Lori, they're getting worried because Donna should have been home by now. She said she was going to be home in the early morning hours. They had plans to go get these tickets, and that's not something Donna would miss out on. Plus, Donna just wasn't the type of person to say she was going to be somewhere and then not be there. So her friends are getting extremely worried about her. Now, when they first arrive at Donna's house, they could tell that there was a little bit of a gathering that had happened. There were cigarettes and a whole bunch of ashes that were in the ashtrays that they dumped. There was beer cans, beer tops that they had thrown away. They had no idea that this could have been a potential crime scene. They had no idea the severity of what was happening at that moment. Now, specifically, Lori remembers that Schlitz beer tops were found, and that's going to come up again here in a little while. The trash, the cigarette butts, the beer cans, the beer tops were thrown away, but we don't know if investigators collected that trash. That would have been a gold mine of fingerprints, DNA that could have been tested later, but we just don't know. There have been very harsh criticisms coming from just about every angle as far as towards the Anne Arundel County Police and how they handled or possibly mishandled evidence. So at first, the police focused heavily on her ex-boyfriend. We'll call him Nick. Apparently, Donna and Nick had just recently broken up. I'm going to let Cordell tell you a little bit more about Donna's history with him. It's pretty alarming.
They had broken up at the time of her death.
I understand that he was abusive. Is that true?
That's what I've been told. And I believe I think he admitted to the one time I think he pushed her really hard and had to go get her ribs looked at or something, that she was bruised or something pretty badly.
Was he the main focus at first of the investigation? Do you know?
As far as I could tell, yeah. I mean, it's like a lot of regular homicides. They start looking to people closest, usually the husband or boyfriend.
So with this kind of background, this kind of past, there's no doubt why Nick was initially looked at as intensely as he was. Statistics will surely point to an abusive ex. However, I do wonder if from the jump there was this hyper focus on him, and that led the police to miss other leads along the way. Being that this is an open case, we don't have a timeline of how exactly AA County Police handled this and the timeline of which persons were interviewed. But I will tell you, there is a lot of suspicious behavior happening with the guys that we have been talking about. By their own admission, 3 of them ended up going to Florida. There's a huge discrepancy in the times that they gave, and that was admitted by one of the guys that gave that first statement to begin with. We also have 2 vehicles that were possibly involved. There have been reports that they were both cleaned intensely, and then shortly afterwards, they were gotten rid of. And that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to these guys. Now, an interesting piece of information comes out in the newspaper, and it was reported by witnesses. On November 17th, a guy shows up to work. He is not scheduled. He is disheveled. He has stickers and briars on him. And even more concerning, he has stains on his jeans that are brownish red in color. Why is he going to work when he's not scheduled? Why does he look a hot mess? What are the stains on his jeans? So if you haven't already guessed, the guy that we're talking about is that 30-something-year-old Carl, the one who creeped Donna out, who supposedly had this little obsession with her and made her very uncomfortable, the guy who is married with kids. Carl wasn't from Bowie, and at that time he was just sort of getting into some of the crowds, and most of them considered him an outsider. His age also made him kind of an outlier, and he just kind of, again, he was a more recent addition to these groups.
He had briars on his clothing. He had stains that looked like blood were on his clothing. And he shows up at work Saturday morning, and he wasn't scheduled to be there, wearing the clothes he had on from his workday on Friday. But according to witnesses at Penn Jersey, stickers, briars, like he'd been walking in the woods, things were stuck to him, and blood, the dark color stains on his clothing.
Was he still high when he went to work?
More than likely.
Why would you do that?
Right. And yet, to our knowledge, none of his clothes were ever confiscated. And he really wasn't interviewed because, like I said, they were after somebody else.
Today, Carl is still very high on the suspect list. When Dave Cordell reopened this case 25 years later, he interviewed Carl, re-interviewed Carl. It was concluded that basically because of his intense drug and alcohol use, that what he said was basically incoherent and nothing that he could use in court. Carl died in 2004, and sadly, many of those who are believed to be suspects or those who have had information are deceased, but not everyone has passed. So that leads us right up to the vehicles that are thought to possibly have been involved with this murder.
We believe there was 2 vehicles important to the case, where one was it was like a 1965 Ford Galaxy station wagon, black in color. And the other one was a white van. I'm not sure if it was a Chevy or Ford. An interesting note on that, within a few weeks, the white van was torched. And then the black station wagon was sold as scrap to a vehicle scrapyard also shortly after the murder. Both of those vehicles should have been seized and entered into a impound evidence bay and processed, because there would have been, in all likelihood, forensic evidence.
Carl happened to own one of these vehicles, a Ford station wagon. Now, there were witnesses that said that he was cleaning it out right after Donna's death, and then shortly after, he actually ended up scrapping that vehicle. He scrapped it for cash, and the thing is, that vehicle, from what other people said, that was his baby. That was his pride and joy. So it's very suspicious that shortly after that happened, he scrapped that vehicle. Now, there's another vehicle, a white van, that is thought to have been involved as well. According to at least one witness, that vehicle, the van, was being hosed down from the inside out. And then shortly after, it actually ended up burning to the ground. So make of that what you will. Now, the police never impounded these vehicles before they were destroyed. However, one piece of information did come out, and that was the fact that those Schlitz beer tops that were found in Donna's house were actually also found in one of these vehicles. Unfortunately, that's all the information we have on that. Now let's look at the three guys who just up and went to Florida. The guys who are known for terrorizing women, intimidating women into having sex with them, drugging them, pulling a train on them. These guys. These guys originally report to the investigators that they left for Florida on the 16th around 10 or 11 p.m. Now they end up getting busted and alive because there's several witnesses that actually saw them in Bowie well after that time. So when Al confronts one of these guys, he basically says, yeah, you caught me in a lie. I think we left more like 10 or 11 a.m. the next day. So the times change from leaving on the 16th around 10 or 11 p.m. to leaving the following day between 10 and 11 a.m. The hours in which Donna's murder occurred. I think it's very suspicious that you are trying to create this alibi that you're not in town, get busted on this alibi, and then just kind of say, you caught me. It's very brazen. It's very cocky. And of course, the question is, why are you lying? Why are you fleeing to Florida? Why are you staying there for 3 or 4 months? But an even bigger question that I have, why are the police not questioning them until they decide to return to Bowie 3 or 4 months later? Why was all that time wasted? So, of course, other leads have been looked into. Again, the investigators really focused heavily on the ex-boyfriend, Nick, there for a while, at least 2 weeks that we know of. But there were other things that they did investigate over the course of this 50 years. In 1987, there was another murder of a woman, Jacqueline Robinson, and that case was originally thought to be connected to Donna's. However, Jacqueline's case was solved with a life sentence conviction back in 1993, and it appears that this connection was thoroughly looked into. There's a link below to one of the court documents in regards to Jacqueline's case, should you want to do a little research on your own. Now, again, there have been unsolved murders in Bowie that may very well be connected to Donna's case in some way or another, especially if we're looking at the fact that there's potentially 2 or 3 people who actually took part in the murder. It wouldn't be unlikely that some of the same characters may have done other things similarly to this over the past 50 years. So there was some brief talk about potentially a serial killer being involved in Donna's case, Samuel Little. This particular theory seems kind of far-fetched to me. Samuel Little did kill people across the country and across the entire United States from 1970 until 2005. So I think the time frame, definitely it makes sense, but I think that's really the only connection that was made. And the reason being is Samuel Little kind of focused really heavily on prostitutes and girls that had some serious drug addictions, as far as that's who he targeted. He's known for the artwork that he created while in prison. The artwork represents his victims, and many of his victims are not named. So I can see why some people might think for a minute that this could be potentially what has happened to Donna, but it just doesn't make sense if you look at the grand scheme of things. Remember, Dave Cordell and Al both agreed that in order for her body to be dumped back on Myers Station Road, it's highly likely that the persons who did that know the area, maybe grew up in the area or just was really familiar with that area. Samuel Little was kind of like all over the place, and he just randomly dumped bodies wherever. He didn't care if they were found or not. There was actually some attempt to conceal Donna's body, at least. Additionally, it's been quoted by many people who've looked into and investigated this case that it is highly, highly likely that Donna knew her killers. Now, there's another lead that came in about some transient people working at Carnival, and they were in Bowie at the time. There is someone or someones who may have witnessed something in the house that they were staying at on Racetrack Road. This house could have potentially been a crime scene, and it doesn't appear that it was searched. It was only 10 minutes away from where Donna was dumped, And there was talk that Donna's clothes could have been found in that house or on that property at some point. Talk that the clothes could have even been burned because there was a burn pit on the property.
That time was being rented by one or more carnival workers who worked the local carnivals that were very popular during the year in our area, and it was leased to a carnival worker. We have been unable to track him down. We've presented that information to law enforcement, and we kind of got there aware of it. They've done something with it, but that was it. And then again, no details.
Very shortly after her death, a tip line was created for Donna's case. It was set up so witnesses could call and give information to the police. Despite receiving 15 to 20 calls in that 2-week period after her death, the police were quoted stating that the case was at a standstill at that point. An FBI criminal profiler was brought in at some point, but the FBI does not have jurisdictions over this case. It was reported all the way back in 2013 that over 200 people had been interviewed at that point. At least 16 men had provided DNA, and witnesses had been brought forth to a grand jury. In 1999, it was reported that DNA had been collected from a suspect that was living in Florida at the time. There was a second suspect living in Syracuse, New York, that refused to give his DNA, so a court order was given in order for him to comply with that. Touch DNA was also explored at some point. My thought immediately went back to that lug wrench that they found, that maybe they thought they had touch DNA on that, or maybe it could have been from other evidence that was collected. But we can see throughout the years, DNA is being touched on again and again in order to try to solve this case. However, it has been years since that has been reported, so likely one of two things are happening here. Either the DNA did not lead to anything, or the police still do not feel like they have enough to charge someone with the murder. I was thinking too, taking this case to court would be so difficult, because if you relied on the DNA of who she had sex with,
Right.
they could easily say it was consensual.
Exactly. Bingo. And they did have semen slides. And, part of it was the murder premeditated? I would believe no. Was the rape premeditated? Good likelihood it was.
Yeah.
It just, everything went south and it escalated. Also factor in the use of PCP.
Yeah, there was forensic samples taken from her body, which were able to be used during my investigation.
Okay.
And of course, it's been 10 years now, so I'm not sure where the technology is, if they're able to retest some of the evidence which remains. That's could be a part of the investigation. They did not have familial DNA back then, where they could reach out to like a second cousin of someone to work their way back to a suspect.
Cordell was able to tell me that there was useful information that came out of those statements to the grand jury, but he was unable to elaborate. So Detective Cordell did not have advancements of familial DNA available to him at the time he was actively investigating, but I did see a few notes during my research regarding familial DNA testing and this case. Someone had reached out to CC Moore. She is one of the most well-known genetic genealogists out there right now. If you have watched any crime show at all whatsoever, there's a good chance that you have run across her or her work. This message was found on Donna's Facebook group where someone following the case had reached out to her asking if she would be willing to do something with this case, and she did express interest in Donna's case. I reached out to CC Moore and her team for a follow-up, but fortunately they couldn't tell me anything, and it seemed like it was more or less for legal reasons. What I've been told is that the previous investigator, Detective DiPietro, declined any opportunity in order to work with CC Moore or to do any familial DNA testing. I have no idea why. I don't know if this was because of financial reasons, if it's because there's no DNA left, or if there's simply a disinterest to do so. Cordell had a lot on his plate when he started this case back in 1997. He was actually one of the ones most responsible for the testing and retesting of the DNA that we just talked about. He also followed leads on the boot prints, a knife, and did stakeouts on anniversary dates. When were you on the case?
I believe I started in 1998, 1997, 1998. It was right before the 25th anniversary, so that would have been 98. So I was doing cold cases. I think my first cold case was way back in the 80s, but so we started looking at it and started to be, worthwhile to pour some time into it. So I ended up working the case until my retirement, 2013. Been a lot of ups and downs. 2 boot prints at the foot of her body.
And did they lead to anything?
I drove that one all the way into the ground as far as I can by trying to identify. It turned out that it looked like it could have been a combat boot, a black combat boot. So I actually went to the logistics school for the United States Army to find out about combat boots that were made in the 60s and 70s. But there was nothing to compare it to now. That person's shoes were long gone. We did locate a weapon much later that when I took it up to the medical examiner's office, they said that this knife, or one exactly like it, caused one of the wounds that was found during autopsy. So we tried to track where that knife had been, where it went. I spent a couple of years working with that. We were able to narrow it down, but we couldn't put it in the possession of somebody at the time of the homicide. We couldn't tell who had it. It had made the rounds of several different people. There was speculation that the van was hidden on a property of the brother who owned a commercial business, gas station, that it was buried somewhere behind there. There was a lot of junk cars and trash and things.
In the early 2000s,
we were never given access to go
Detective
back
Portal
there.
brought this
I
case
tried
to
to
the
look
Mid-Atlantic
from the air.
Cold Case
We went up in a
Homicide
helicopter to try
Investigators
to survey the area.
Association.
The white van may have had nothing to do with it.
Sometime in the year 2000, Detective Portal brought this case to the Mid-Atlantic Cold Case Homicide Investigators Association. So he created a presentation in order to see if the teams and persons who have extensive history in homicide cases could brainstorm any new ideas to solve this case.
It was very tough to leave the case open.
Well, it sounds like a lot was done. A lot of angles, everything, the boots, the going up in the helicopter, the knife,
I did a stakeout, the 25th anniversary. I sat out there at the body recovery site for a period of time. We even did something at the cemetery. Thought that there might be, someone would revisit place, where this occurred, and maybe they did, and maybe it occurred totally somewhere we haven't looked.
I wasn't able to find exactly when this happened, but the Bowie Alumni Association actually put up a $1,000 reward for information in Donna's case. At the 25-year anniversary, the class of 1973 welcomed investigators to come in and set up a table in order to not only pay tribute to Donna, but also get more leads. And leads did come from that. It seemed like throughout the years, they did work with investigators and they were very cooperative. But for some reason, at the 50th anniversary of their class reunion, something shifted, and we don't know exactly what, but they didn't want anyone to set up a table at that reunion. Now, this does not represent the entire class of 1973, only the people who had it within their power to allow something like this. They declined to do that. It's disappointing to see that kind of lack of cooperation. And it's especially disappointing because you have Al and you have Bill and, Dave might have even went back there and introduced or reintroduced themselves to the class of 1973. And maybe one of those, citizen detectives could have, just being there, maybe their presence would have encouraged someone to talk. You never know. And I have had an enormous amount of cooperation from others when researching this case, but I will tell you there was a point in time that I was very disappointed, and that was when it came to Detective DiPietro. He was on the case at the time of the 50th year anniversary of Donna's murder, and I reached out to him just to see if I could maybe sit down and do an interview with him. I told him a quick interview, 20, 30 minutes max, and then I also asked, At the very least, could he please put out some information that would be new to the public that might help bring in more leads or might reignite the case in some way? And unfortunately, I never received a phone call back, and my phone calls that I made after that went unanswered. So that was disappointing. We now have a new investigator on the case, which I have not made contact with him yet. My hope is the new investigator will be more willing to be more active on the case, especially when you have all these helping hands around you that are feeding you information. And that can be used as a great resource should the detective choose to use it. Donna's mom was quoted saying, "I can tell you, I never dreamed we wouldn't find out who did it. We never dreamed that all this time would go by and we wouldn't find out why." This sadly would be the case for Dolores's entire life. She ended up passing in 2008. Sadly, Donna's dad and her brother have also since passed. Donna's brother Alan did have a daughter, Jen, and I'm going to let Jen tell you a little bit about her experience growing up with this hanging over their family.
It's a weird feeling because I feel like I love her so much, but I've never even met her. I don't even know her.
Can you just tell us how you are related to Donna Dustin?
I'm her niece.
Okay.
So my father is her brother, her younger brother.
Okay.
I'm his daughter. I wasn't alive when this happened. Okay. Yeah. I wasn't born until 85.
Okay. So can you explain a little bit as far as what you heard through your family? And
I mean, my whole life I felt like I knew her. I mean, my grandmother talked about her from the time I was from the time I was itty bitty.
Yeah.
And my grandmother and I were super close. And I think our bond was like that because I reminded her so much of Donna. Like if you looked at our senior pictures next to each other, I heard it all the time, not just from my grandparents, not just from my dad, people that didn't know me. God, you look so much like Donna. It's crazy. You could be her twin. Your mannerisms are even the same as hers.
Yeah.
And so I think for my grandmother, it was like her second chance. And so her and I were always like this.
Right.
But I saw what it did to my grandmother my whole life. There were plenty of times where like she would try, I'd catch her crying, or like, you know, she'd hear a song or see a movie. And I think God works in mysterious ways. I think that's why I look so much like her. And ironically, my youngest brother was born on the day Donna was murdered.
Oh.
And what's funny is he was 6 weeks early.
Yeah.
And I think that day, like, she needed that. She needed that day to not be like it gave her something. Oh, good, it's my grandson's birthday. We can have a birthday party now. And I think that day would have always affected her. But I think maybe my dad needed that also.
Yeah.
Even my dad was too headstrong to ever admit that because that's just how he was. And my grandfather, did not talk about her, period. I heard stories through my grandmother and like people that knew her. My dad was not one to really talk about her. But what my dad, and I wish he was still alive to see this, like what my dad didn't understand was even though like he felt like I wasn't listening, I heard you all those times you told me, like, remember what happened to your aunt? It can happen. You know, a lot of kids have that. It can't ever happen to me. Like you don't realize, but my dad taught me and my sister, especially me and my sister from a very young age. I love you. Your mother loves you. This family loves you. That don't mean everybody out there loves you.
With the investigation, do you know if the detective kind of kept in touch with them?
I don't know because, you know, the last time I had anything to do with like Gordo was, I can't remember if I was in 10th, 11th or 12th grade, but they had reopened it when I was in high school because it had been closed for a while. And Mr. Cordell specifically came to meet with my grandparents one day and specifically requested that I be there so that he could ask me, would it be okay with me? Because he wanted me to know there's still a lot of people that you probably go to school with whose kids were friends with Donna. So if I bring this up, that means you get bombarded with not only the good, but also the bad. Now, am I an eye for an eye type person? Yeah. So if I think I will be the first one up front and center in that courtroom waiting for them to throw the book at him.
Yeah. Well, crazy
because what this guy doesn't understand is like, he robbed us of like an aunt and cousins that we could have potentially had. Like, my grandmother used to tell me all the time, you guys would have probably had awesome relationship with your.
Case number 73-077556. Legally, that's what Donna's case has become after 50 years with no justice. But emotionally, what this case has become to some people, it's immeasurable. Al, Bill, and Dave are working this case continuously. They are constantly interviewing and re-interviewing people. They are going to locations that could have been related to the crime. They're updating the community on what they can. Al began working on the case well over 3 years ago after his son introduced him to the case. His son had worked with someone connected to or friends with Donna. Al has almost become the glue in keeping this case alive online, continuously posting on Donna's Facebook page and digging into the details that people are sharing. They continue to keep Donna's case alive. With their work, they have dug up some incredible information and have had brand new leads that were never discovered back when this murder occurred. They have a plan of action, and there are things that can still be done, and they're doing them.
A lot of people say that they know what happened and they know who did it.
Do you think there's still evidence or other leads that can be worked on right now?
Oh, absolutely.
Do you think the general community has an idea of who did it?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think there are more people than people think that could shed light on it.
Anything else you want to say on record?
I just ask that if you have knowledge, and I believe I've talked to people that do, if the people that did this are dead, please come forward and give us there's no closure for the family in a homicide. Only parts of a homicide can be have closure, but to put the suspicion, and even for the people that have been wrongly accused or have been identified as potentially involved, if they're innocent, that that would be a big relief for them to be able to clear their name. But I don't expect there would be a prosecution, but I'm not the prosecutor, and that's up to the the current state's attorney if they are even able to make an arrest. But a case can be closed with no arrest and with no prosecution, which I think is still possible. And if someone has that information, even if they don't think it's relevant, it could be very relevant to the case. And it would be best for investigators that have the case now and know it to be able to dissect that a little bit more. So I just ask, as a longtime investigator, come forward with the information. It's it's not going to hurt at this point.
Yeah, it's time.
Yes, it's been quite a long time.
If you're into true crime at all, you know that we see a lot of indifference to or disinterest in cold cases, especially ones that are as old as Donna's case. And these cases get passed from one detective to another and another over the years. I have to say that it is pretty incredible to see how Al, Bill, and Dave have continued to plug away at Donna's case with nothing else in mind other than getting justice for her and her family. They have so much passion for this, and really for no reason other than to see the solution, to see justice. When talking to people in the area and people who knew Donna, it was intense. There were times I was not sure if I was speaking to someone who was a good guy or a bad guy, if I was being told the truth or being misled. But I will say that overall the community wants to see justice served. Donna's family and her friends know the brutality that she faced in the last minutes of her life, and they want answers. They want the investigators to wipe the dust off of her case file and finally put this to rest with officially naming the perpetrators and charging anyone who may still be alive. Please use those contacts that I've listed below in order to bring forth information to the case. Anyone who sent in leads at the beginning of the case or at the 25-year mark or somewhere in between the beginning and now, I still encourage you to reach out and put forth that information again. Again, when cases jump from detective to detective, sometimes things can get lost, and let's make sure that we don't lose anything in Donna's case. There has been some rumor that some people are hesitant to talk because of the person or persons who are currently alive, the fact that they might be threatened, the fact that they themselves might be hurt, the fact that they're in danger. I need you to listen to this. If you know something, your name has already come up. With all of the interviews that have been done, with all of the people who have cooperated, your name is already out there. Are you not already in danger? Get the weight off your chest and come forward. Bowie, again, it's tight-knit. People know who talks about what. These names are concealed in this video, but they're not concealed in Bowie. Just let that sink in. I hope that I can bring a new case update to you saying that Donna's case has been solved. Feel free to comment and discuss below. I just ask that you use discretion when doing so, and please be respectful in the comments. If that video does come out, you're going to want to know, so make sure you hit the subscribe button, hit the bell icon so that you know when my videos come out. I might also be doing another case in Bowie here in the next few months, so just a heads up on that. Until then, I will put all major case updates in the comments below. Also, if there's anything that I've gotten wrong, I will put edits and updates below as well. Everything is in the description box. I want to give a huge thank you to Al Gaither, to Bill Smith, to Dave Cordell, and to Jen, Donna's niece, as well as everyone else that I have spoken to. And I even want to extend a thank you to everyone who has cooperated, who has brought forth good information, and who has been an asset to the case. I also want to extend a huge thank you to everyone who has supported CRC and our mission. I've had some of you reach out to ask me how you can contribute to our cause. You can donate to CRC by the GoFundMe below. You can also reach out to closerangecrime@yahoo.com if you would like to donate in another way. All funds go towards new investigations and new videos. Thank you to everyone who has donated and those who donate in the future. And guys, remember, don't be afraid to go out there and raise some hell. I'll see you in the next one.